Welcome to Ghost of a Podcast. I'm your host, Jessica Lanyadoo. I'm an astrologer, psychic medium, and animal communicator, and I'm going to give you your weekly horoscope and no bullshit mystical advice for living your very best life. Welcome back to Ghost of a Podcast. This week, we're looking at the astrology of September 14th through the 20th of 2025. And there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot of transits occurring. I want to take a moment to acknowledge a couple of really important things. When we do these horoscopes, what we're looking at is the astrology of this moment, right? The astrology of this date or of this week, even of the month. But this exists inside of a much larger scope of development. We are in eclipse season. Next week will be the second and final eclipse of the season. We are going through a Pluto out of bounds. We are at the very, very beginning of Pluto out of bounds. We are going through other outer planet transits that direct the color and shape of the astrology of this time. That's where we're at. And so as we unpack the astrology of this moment, we want to understand that you as an individual and us as a collective are going through larger themes. And as the transits of this week occur, what happens is that the transits of this week impact the larger themes we're going through. So on a personal level, that looks like you being in a position where you are getting activated, or situations are developing, or you're making progress, or dealing with setbacks in your mental health or healing journey. In regards to collective conditions, there are larger themes that are playing themselves out regardless of the day-to-day transits. And then the day-to-day transits occur and they spark developments. And so we see massive movements from individuals and groups of people and communities that are happening all over the world in many ways. And they are in a meaningful way spurred on by the emotionality and the reactiveness of eclipse season. Now, they don't exist in a bubble or on an island, right? And so they are reactive to larger conditions at play. When we seek to understand what's happening in this moment, it's important that we don't get so detail oriented that we actually lose perspective around what it is that is happening in the big picture. We want to remember that there is, on a social level, larger systems at play, whether we look at them as, social and political systems, astrological systems. There are larger systems at play. And also, on a personal level, you are who you are. You are going through the patterns that you are going through. And those patterns are articulated by your birth chart. They're articulated by your transits. But those patterns that are at play are at play. And they are being activated moment by moment, day by day, through the astrology of the moment. And it's really important that you're aware of that you understand that in general. But in particular, there's a lot of Saturn action this week. And on Sunday of next week, on the 21st of September, we have a solar eclipse in Virgo, and it's very Saturnian. Saturn features pretty meaningfully. And so in this very Saturnian moment, there are a number of things to be mindful of. One is that Saturn is consequential. How we engage, what we do, is not just consequential in the short term, but it has long-term consequences. When we're dealing with Saturn, we're dealing with systems and patterns that are traditional, that are inherited and passed down. So they may be your personal traditions, they may be your epigenetics, it might be your family traditions, and it may be governments or older people with power, or how older generations set things up. Saturn is also related to control issues, right? There is a way when we're dealing with Saturn in your birth chart or by transit, that you are either learning how to take responsibility, cultivate mastery, engage with a conservationist's attitude, or you're being motivated by fear. You're being motivated by scarcity, insecurity, defensiveness. The risk with Saturn is that we develop a coldness or a lack of empathy for other people because we are focused on punishment and right and wrong, because we are focused on our own defensiveness and our own insecurities and fears. So if I don't clamp down on you, then you will attack me. How you engage with Saturnian energies is a reflection on you. How our systems embody Saturnian energy is a reflection on people with power and on us. And whenever we are dealing with a lot of Saturn energy, you got to know that it's time for being intentional. It's time for being intentional. So how can you be intentional about what's happening in your life? How can you be intentional about what's happening in the world and how you're participating? And not just in the immediacy of this moment, even though your fears or insecurities may compel you to only think about yourself or only think about this moment, but to think about the big picture, to think about your long-term plans, your long-term engagement, what you have done to get to this point, and what you are doing to build towards where you want to be. Now, we will, of course, talk very specifically about the solar eclipse in next week's forecast. I'll also be unpacking more about the eclipse on my Patreon, so you can join me there for that conversation. But I want to really kind of ground you into this moment of consequence, this moment that is not just happening spontaneously, things built up inside of you, in your life, in the world, on whatever level you want to look at it. Things have been building up to get to this point. And so, how can we take responsibility? How can we show up? That's the question, right? That's the assignment. And within it all, it is really important that we are emotionally present because it's eclipse season. And that means your emotional presence is the assignment. Your emotional accountability is the assignment. So do your best to show up for all of it. All right. So we're looking, as I said, at the week of September 14th through the 20th of 2025. And the first exact transit of the week happens on Monday, the 15th of September. And if you're looking along with me on the video version, now available on Spotify and on YouTube, you are looking at Astrology for Days, my astrologer's pro tool that allows you to track the transits that happen all the days. Okay. So the first transit of this week is a soft pitch from the universe. That is a baseball metaphor, in case you didn't know. It's a lovely one. Venus sextile to Mars is a great time for connecting with people, making shit happen, starting a project, and in particular, a creative project or a project with other people, something that you are mobilizing around. Venus sextile to Mars is not what I would consider a terribly loud or impactful transit. However, it is definitely one that supports your ability to work well with others or to participate in, create, or join up with like group endeavors or joint endeavors. Now, this transit will be exact at 8:04 p.m. Pacific time, and it's happening with Venus at 25 degrees of Leo in 51 minutes, sextile to Mars at the same degrees of Libra. Very social zodiac signs. So it's a great time for working well and nicely with others. That brings us to the 16th, where shit gets a little bit more intense. On Tuesday, the 16th, we have two exact transits, both of them to Chiron. So Venus is at 26 degrees and 13 minutes of Leo at exactly 3:11 a.m. Pacific time, forming an exact trine to Chiron, same degrees of Aries. Later that morning at 8:47 a.m. Pacific time, we've got Mars at 26 degrees and 12 minutes of Libra, forming an exact opposition to Chiron at the same degrees of Aries. So let's start with Venus trine to Chiron. Venus trine to Chiron is a transit that can be really helpful and important for your self-worth. Chiron is always related to core wounding. And the parts of you that really struggle to be embodied, in particular, the embodiment part is related to Chiron being in Aries right now. Venus speaks to your relationships. It speaks to your value system. So whether we're talking about the value you place on yourself, your relationship to yourself, the values that guide your life, or we're talking about the relationships that you value and how you value them, and whether or not, or whether or how you value yourself within those relationships. Venus trine to Chiron is incredibly supportive. It empowers you to engage with things that would typically be very painful and provoke struggle, and to do so in a way that is harmonious, that supports you in growing your self-esteem and your self-worth. This transit overlapping with the Venus sextile to Mars is lovely. It further empowers you to work through and on your relationship issues, to work with others, to perceive and hold your own value, and to perceive and hold your values even when it's challenging, maybe even especially when it's challenging. And we want to really tap into these energies because they overlap with the Mars opposition to Chiron. Now, Mars in Libra opposite Chiron in Aries is really challenging. This transit can suggest violence. This can be violence from a lone individual, and it can be violence from the state because Mars is related to policing and military. And Chiron is inherently wounded. So we're now talking about and looking at systems that are inherently violent and inhumane, that do not respect body autonomy. Again, Chiron is in Aries, and so it's very much related to the body, not exclusive to the body, but related to the body. And so we can experience, under a Mars opposition to Chiron, state-led violence. And state-led violence can show up legislatively, right? It can show up in terms of like boots on the ground action, or, you know, boots on the ground is an expression from like old school war. There's so many ways that do not in any way include boots or ground for there to be violent and system-led action at this time. Because Mars is in Libra, it is very possible, maybe even likely, that we will see at least something happen legislatively because Libra is related to the law. Mars opposite Chiron confronts you with a sense of safety or feeling like you're not safe. It confronts you with deep wounds, and deep wounds that can be quite core to you and that you feel really viscerally, which is to say that you feel it really in your body. And oftentimes when you experience emotions in your body, it can feel like exhaustion, like you're falling apart. It can feel like anger or rage, like you have to push out, like irritation, defensiveness. It's very Marsy stuff. When and if that comes up for you, whether it comes up inside of you or in a relationship with somebody else where it's clearly what's up for them, how you show up and participate is the only thing you can control, right? And so how you behave is a big part of what the Mars opposition to Chiron is about. Acting in ways that reflect your core wounds, your greatest fears about yourself, your insecurities, your pain, usually is not acting with integrity or with wisdom. And so it's really important for you to notice how you feel and to stay present with and invested in your body. And that's hard, right? That's really hard. But this transit requires it because there's likely to be conflict. under a Mars opposition to Chiron, whether that's in your life, whether that's inside of your body, inside of your psyche, or it's in the world, or if you're real unlucky, all three. And how you behave because it's Mars, what you do, how you show up, how you move through it, and the motivations underpinning what you do, those things are a reflection on you, and they are what you need to live with. And Mars opposite Chiron certainly brings about the opportunity for healing, but it's healing by going through it, not going around it. This is not the time for shutting down. And it's also not a time where you have to go it alone. Mars opposition to Chiron can make you feel like you're in this alone, but we know you're not. We know you're not because we know you're not. We also know you're not because Pluto is in Aquarius. And that larger umbrella transit is trying to teach you and me and everyone else about community and the power of community. We also know you're not because Venus is trine Chiron and Venus is sextile Mars at the same time as Mars is opposite Chiron. All to say in English, listen, we are meant to reach out to others, whether it's to lend support or to ask for support or both, right? That's what the larger astrology is telling you and me. The larger astrology is also telling us that we are all emotionally activated right now. We are in eclipse season and it's very Pisces Virgo vibes, which again is about your mental health. It's about your physical health. It's about what you do day to day to support and show up for what's happening on a more subtle and nuanced level, in addition to all the other things. This is a lot. The best way to navigate through this is with intention. It's by not allowing your base survival instincts to be the only thing you listen to unless that's absolutely imminently necessary. And chances are high that you will have more than one option. When a human is in a state of fear or deep insecurity or activation, which honestly, this transit can trigger any of those things, it's really common to think, I only have one of two options. I can either do something or not do something. I can either go hard or go away. And the truth of the matter is, most of the time, we have more than two options. If you feel that you only have one of two options, you're probably pretty activated. And if you find that you're pretty activated, then the first and most important thing to do is cope with the activation before you strive to make a decision. If you have the luxury of time, which, you really may, if you have the luxury of time, make sure you're not acting out of Mars Chiron activation, because that is a defensive, insecure, self-fulfilling prophecy kind of energy to move from. And we don't need that. Let's make things more complicated though, okay? Let's go. Okay. So on Wednesday, the 17th, aka the next day at 10:47 a.m. Pacific time, Mercury is exactly opposite to Saturn. We've got Mercury at 28 degrees of Virgo and 47 minutes sitting exactly opposite to Saturn, same degrees of Pisces, right? Because we know that Saturn was in Aries, but it's doing its final retrograde back into Pisces for the last time for about 29 years. Mercury opposition to Saturn is an important transit. Right? And it's a little bit of what I gave you a little amuse-bouche about in the intro. Mercury opposite Saturn puts you in a negative frame of mind. Mercury is your mind. So it's not your nervous system, but it's your mind. And Saturn is scarcity. Saturn is reality. Saturn is limitations. Saturn is structure. When Mercury and Saturn sit opposite to each other, what can often happen is you feel limited by reality. You feel that you want to talk to your friends, but no one's available. You feel that the rules and systems in the world or in your life are forcing you into a corner. Mercury opposition to Saturn can make a person feel depressive. And the reason why is because we're focused on scarcity, we're focused on negativity, and we're focused on what can't work. If you have any kind of predisposition towards nihilism, this transit can certainly accentuate it, especially if it hits your chart directly. This is a bad time for innovating solutions because Saturn is not about progress, it's about tradition. And the conservationism of Saturn can too easily shift into conservatism. Now, conservatism is not inherently bad or good, but this is a time that is really asking for progress, for an innovation of what can be and what can come next. And when Mercury is opposite to Saturn, that can feel insurmountable. Now, the positive of this transit, Mercury opposite Saturn, can be a time where you finally, like, things come together, your ideas gel, you can plan a path forward. And maybe it's not super exciting, but the steps are really clear. Saturn is related to long-term planning. Mercury is the details. So you can sort through a lot of details during a Mercury opposition to Saturn. This can be a time where you, like, finally, like, empty out your inbox or pay tickets or something like that. Mercury opposite Saturn is good for dealing with reality. If you have the ability to work through your ideas constructively, this transit can be a great asset. Unfortunately, it can make you feel lonely or stuck in your relationships. So it's not inherently a great time for processing, although it might be unavoidable. If you are going to process with people, remember my golden rule, which is don't process with people you don't trust. Processing, talking things through has to include acts of goodwill from both parties. Both parties must agree upon what is a fair way of communicating. How important is it to listen to the other person? If you don't have that with the person you're processing with, then you probably shouldn't be processing with them. Taking responsibility for your part, taking responsibility for how you participate is a big part of this transit. Now, in regards to how it overlaps with the Mars opposition to Chiron, it can make it a lot harder to, like, get out of your own habits and your own defenses and reactions, unfortunately. The way to counteract that tendency is by staying connected to Venus, aka your values. When you act in ways that reflect your values, and again, Venus is sextile Mars, Venus is trine to Chiron, then even if you struggle, at least you are struggling in ways that reflect what is true for you, what you truly believe in, and what is authentic to you. And that's really valuable. That's really important. So, last important thing to say about this transit. Not only are you likely to be in a negative frame of mind, but it is very possible under this transit that you actually encounter bad news, that you find out something isn't going to happen, you find out something is going to happen that you don't want to happen, that kind of a thing. This is when it's really important to remember that just because things seem bad or negative, that you're not getting what you want, that you're not seeing the progress you'd like to see in this moment, doesn't mean that what you're going through and what's happening cannot be something that you learn from and that you use, and that it doesn't have utility. It's really important to look for the utility even in the things that aren't working out well, even in the things that are disappointing, because you can choose to learn from anything. You can choose to grow from anything. And the beauty of Saturn is that it is related to the cultivation and embodiment of wisdom. And wisdom isn't just like the learning of things. It's being able to integrate and synthesize and be able to use what you've learned. So this Mercury opposition to Mars in this very chaotic week astrologically is a time for you to cultivate wisdom, whether or not things are going well, whether or not you get shitty news or bad things happen in the world. Okay, now that brings us to Thursday, September 18th, where we don't have one Mercury transit, we have 3. So this should surprise no one because right now Neptune is at like almost 1 degree of Aries, Uranus is at 1 degree of Gemini, and Pluto is at 1 degree of Aquarius. This means these three outer planets, the three generational planets, are all in a lovely relationship to each other. Uranus and Pluto are trine to each other, and they are both sextile to Neptune. This is lovely. We love to see it. It does indicate the capacity for meaningful spiritual growth, for meaningful systemic growth, for growth through technology. Now, the growth of what is always the question to ask, right? We don't want to be idealistic with astrology in such a way that we turn away from the reality we are all collectively going through, right? We are living through a time where people turn to AI for spiritual assistance and guidance. That's really dangerous. We are going through a time of rapid growth and development collectively. And that is what this beautiful configuration of planets indicates. The capacity for your individual and for our collective growth is massive. But that doesn't make it per se easy. And it doesn't mean that it's going to happen through, ponies and lollipops. I wish it would because I love both of those things, but it's not what we seem to be going through at this time. Okay, 3:01 p.m. Pacific time. Mercury is at 0 degrees of Libra and 53 minutes, and it's exactly opposite to Neptune, same degrees of Aries. 9:52 p.m., several hours later, Mercury is at 1 degree of Libra and 24 minutes, forming an exact trine to Uranus, same degrees of Gemini. And then finally, Mercury is at 1 degree and 31 minutes of Libra at 11:27 p.m. Pacific time, forming an exact trine to Pluto, same degrees of Aquarius. I'm going to start with the two trines. Mercury trine to Uranus and Mercury trine to Pluto. Such wonderful transits. We love to see it overlapping with the Mercury opposition to Saturn and opposition to Neptune. What they indicate is the capacity for exploring deep thoughts, for having deep conversations, for facilitating progress and innovation. These transits support connecting to other people, connecting to ideas, making plans, exploring possibility, and expanding within possibility. These transits support you and us in moving beyond simply the probable. And that is gorgeous. We need that any day. But because Mercury's opposite Saturn, putting us in such a negative frame of mind, and it's also opposite to Neptune, kicking up major anxieties, this is especially important. So before I tell you about this Mercury opposition to Neptune, I want to remind you of this very important fact. You need to start from where you're at. Do not start from a fantasy. Do not start from judgment. This is a time to start from where you're at. So if you're in a really negative frame of mind, then you're going to be able to best use these supportive transits to get yourself to a place of neutrality. Maybe not a place of like ecstatic happiness. If you're in a relationship or in relationships that are really challenging you, then you want to tap into Uranus and Pluto trine to Mercury so that you can explore what is possible and hang out in the depths. Because whenever there's Pluto, there's depths, right? Being able to explore ideas, to be curious. This is the gift of Mercury. Now, Mercury opposite to Neptune kicks up anxiety, right? Mercury is your mind, Neptune is anxiety. Why does it kick up anxiety? The reason why it kicks up anxiety is because Neptune kind of breaks down barriers, which sounds great, right? But imagine that you're in a busy space and you can hear not just, I don't know, whatever you're talking about with your friend, but you can hear all the conversations around you of all the people who are on their phones, who are in person with people. You can hear the music and the radio or the TV that all the people are listening to all around you. It's so much information that it becomes really hard to make sense of any of the individual bits of information because you're being flooded. The flooding that occurs under Neptune transits, especially like, conjunctions, squares, and oppositions, this one's in opposition, that flooding creates a sense of overwhelm that most commonly breaks down to anxiety. So a lot of people are going to feel straight up exhausted, right? When we're dealing with Mercury opposite Neptune, you can feel easily demoralized or defeated. You can feel helpless and hopeless. So again, you want to lean on those trines to Uranus and Pluto because this is not easy energy to deal with. When Neptune and Saturn sit on top of each other, as they are doing now, we must redefine and reshape our relationship to activity and consequence, to the present and how we navigate it. And this means being honest with yourself about what your capacity is. Your capacity is going to be potentially smaller during this transit, especially if you have any planets at very late degrees of mutable sign, and the mutable signs are Virgo, Sag, Gemini, and Pisces, or very early degrees of a cardinal sign, which are Libra, Aries, Capricorn, and Cancer. So you may be feeling overwhelmed. You may be exposed to news or information that is straight up false, like total fiction, or a misunderstanding or misconstruing of facts. You want to not jump to conclusions. In the world we live in, outrage and reactiveness is currency. Where you give your attention is currency. Strive to be intentional. Strive to be well boundaried, remembering that boundaries are related to Neptune. They are differently related to Saturn, but Saturn has a tendency to push into rules. These are the rules, and here's a consequence for you breaking the rules. Boundaries occur as a result of not just self-awareness, but some measure of self-worth, because boundaries are yours to identify, to name, and to hold. You can ask other people to respect your boundaries, but ultimately your job is to respect your boundaries, as well as the boundaries of others, of course. So, during this transit, practice good mental and spiritual hygiene, in part by having healthy boundaries with yourself around what you allow yourself to fixate on where you allow your thoughts to linger. If you're feeling demoralized, if you're feeling helpless or hopeless, then it might be important for you to redirect your energy to something neutral or fortifying, so that you can get yourself to a place where you are able to be constructive or innovative, where you're able to stay present with what is, so you can navigate it with your humanity intact, thank you, Neptune, but also sustainably, thank you, Saturn. Keeping in mind, Mars is still opposite fucking Chiron, right? Which means we're in it. You're feeling it. Shit is happening in the world around you. That's what time it is. That's what time it is. Now, this is a lot, so we're just going to take a pause. We're going to acknowledge there's a lot of energy at play, and all you need to do within it is your best, and your best originates from here and now. We have one more day to look at astrologically, and it's on Saturday, the 20th of September. On Saturday, the 20th of September, we have not one, but two exact transits, and they're both very challenging. We've got Venus at 1 degree of Virgo in 23 minutes, forming an exact square to Uranus at the same degrees of Gemini. That's exact at 8:41 a.m. Pacific time. Later that night at 10:46 p.m. Pacific time, the sun will be at 28 degrees of Virgo in 31 minutes, forming an exact opposition to Saturn. There's a number of things to name here, but first let me say, it's the 20th. On the 21st, we have a solar eclipse, which means that the transits exact during the day of the 20th are going to feature meaningfully in the solar eclipse chart. Related to that, because solar eclipses are a sun and moon conjunction, aka a new moon, right? A very consequential new moon. Because the sun and Saturn are opposite to each other at 10:46 p.m. Pacific time on the 20th, then when we have the solar eclipse at around 1 p.m., it's just before 1 p.m. on the 21st, that means that Saturn will be opposite to the solar eclipse. Not exactly, but it'll be pretty damn tight. And so that kind of intensifies the energies of that specific transit, which is why I started off this episode talking to you about Saturn. Now, Venus square to Uranus is a transit that I kind of tend to love, but I think can be really challenging at the same time. And it just goes to show not all quote unquote bad or challenging transits are bad or challenging for everyone all the time. Venus square to Uranus is a transit that creates the unexpected. It creates upsets, and often things that are really not predictable occur on this transit. Uranus in general is related to the unpredictable. So we can expect the unexpected. And within that, you may experience something happening inside of your relationships that you did not expect. Like you might behave in a way that you were not planning on acting. You may say or do something that just creates a consequence, like impacts someone else in a way that you really didn't see coming. Or somebody else might behave in this way. It might happen very close to you. It might happen more in your community. Venus square Uranus is upsetting because Uranus is upsetting. But we have to be mindful about what the word upsetting means. Upsetting can be like, oh, I'm sad, I'm upset. But it is also like to upset a system that is set up to harm a group of people is to create progress, right? Disruption and upsets are exactly what ruts require. They're exactly what broken or harmful systems require. So we want upsets. We just want them to go the way we want them to go, which doesn't always happen. Venus square to Uranus upsets systems so that you can have more authenticity and alignment. That's the best case scenario here. So if you have the opportunity to act or relate in a way that better reflects your values, then you are doing the best possible thing during the Venus square to Uranus. Venus square to Uranus is an opportunity to achieve greater alignment by not slipping into expectation or habit. That's the potential. That's the beauty. Relationships can shift in ways that create more freedom and authenticity. The problem is Venus loves security and stability. Nobody loves security and stability more than Venus, except for Saturn. And as I said, the sun is opposite Saturn. So it may be really challenging to avoid falling back on tradition, falling back on your individual feelings of stability and security. And if something happens in your community, in your country, in the world at large, that is militarized, that creates upsets, that fucks with the status quo, then this date is a time when we may see a really intense cracking down from the powers that be. On a more personal level, you may feel like you need to really hunker down and protect yourself, or you may need to do what's expected of you instead of what's authentic for you. The sun opposition to Saturn is a challenging transit. It's testing, right? It tests your sense of self. And it does so by confronting you with restrictions, difficulties, consequences. And they might not feel fair. They might feel disproportionate. And that's because Saturn can be so heavy-handed. Saturn in general represents like systems of power. It represents people who are older than you or who have more wisdom than you or more power than you. We can really learn from Saturn. And also we can feel really trapped or stuck by Saturn. This transit usually kicks up struggle because the sun is your sense of self. The sun is your vitality. And when the sun and Saturn are opposite to each other, you can feel like you're not seen. You can feel like you're not safe. You may feel like you are being limited by your circumstances or by other people. And those limitations, whether they are just or not, whether they are real or not, feel really bad to you. And so when you are in a state of fear or struggle or hardship, how do you behave? Do you get depressive? Do you give up? Do you fight really hard? Do you get more conservative? Like, how do you behave? This is a really important question to reflect upon because this is a time for change. It's a solar eclipse. Again, we're not there yet, but we want to be really mindful during this transit of the fact that we will see this transit dragged into the solar eclipse. Who you choose to be when you don't feel safe and when you don't feel seen is really important. And who you are online is who you are, just for the record. Who you are in your intimate relationships is who you are. Who you are to people in customer service, to strangers, to your enemies, to your allies, to your community, and to people who you feel are very much not in your community. Those things are all who you are. The sun in astrology, the symbol of it is a circle with a dot in the center. It's you. That's you. You're the circle with the dot in the center, right? And so it's important when a transit like the sun opposition to Saturn occurs to be able to hang out with the authentic truth of who you are. How you navigate through your anxieties, your insecurities, how you navigate through vulnerability, all of that is activated by this transit. And you don't have to be perfect. In fact, you're for sure not perfect. You're for sure going to make mistakes. You're for sure going to be confronted by past mistakes, something like that, right? Because you're a person, not because there's something wrong with you, because you're a person. So how do you choose to be a person based on what you're learning now? How do you choose to show up? Sun opposite Saturn reinforces that you are accountable for what you do, how you do, why you do. And it confronts you with that in usually a really hard to tolerate way. Consider taking as creative and authentic of approach as possible. Now, Saturn's not about creativity, but Venus square to Uranus is. Strive to show up in ways that are aligned with what is authentic for you. That is reflective of your values, which is Venus, but is, again, really a reflection of what is authentic, that dot in the center of the circle, right? What is authentic and aligned for you? Because we are on the eve of the solar eclipse, we know that this is a time for planting seeds. Now, sun opposite Saturn is not usually a time for planting seeds. It's a time for stepping into the garden and being like, oh shit, that didn't live, that did. You know, it's more where it's consequential. The consequences of what you've already planted are coming up. But new moons, which is what solar eclipses are always about setting intentions. So how can you show up for what is real and embody authentically the truth of where you're at? How can you embody your wisdom, which is consequential, which does often come through struggle and hardship, in a way that reflects your own progress, in a way that helps to facilitate our progress, like your relationships, your communities, your ability to be a part of things getting better over time? And if the answer to that is, I'm stuck, I don't fucking know, I'm not making any progress, I feel depressed, I feel limited, I feel like I don't know how I'm going to get through this, then you start from there without judgment, without cruelty, but with accountability to yourself, accountability to the people that impacts. You got to start where you're at, giving yourself the grace of being here in your sweet little meat suit, living this life, and that it is at times quite challenging. That grace is really about having empathy for the feelings and the struggles without releasing accountability for what you must do. It is really challenging to be going through these transits where, Mars is opposite to Chiron and it kind of activates and opens you up. And then Mercury is opposite to Saturn and Neptune, just making your frame of mind not particularly constructive or grounded. And then have Venus come around squaring Uranus and Sun opposite Saturn, right? This is not an easy set of transits. Now, luckily, we have these really supportive transits peppered throughout the week, starting with a Venus sextile to Mars and trine to Chiron. We also have Mercury doing a lot of really lovely things, trining Uranus, trining Pluto. There's a great deal of potential for growth, healing, recovery, alignment, and progress this week. But it is not easy. I want to remind you that in this period that we're in, community, connection, these things are the answer to most problems. Community and connection. And if you're a hermit, that's going to look really different than if you're a super extrovert, right? But that's the answer. That's where we're at. So if you find yourself feeling really isolated and alienated, reach out. If you find that you're actually like having a super chill week and it's not that serious for you, then reach out to your friends who you haven't heard from for a while. Reach out to your friends that you know take things really heavy. Reach out to your friends who you know could use something. And in 2025, reach out to your friends can just be like sending a heart emoji. It does not have to be a massive lift. But if you have the capacity to show up for others, of course, do that. That's it for this week's astrology. As always, if you would like to get a reading with me, you can apply to do so through the contact form on my website, and you should tune in to the midweek reading. And you can not only hear a reading that may or may not reflect what you're going through in the astrology of your birth chart, but if you are studying astrology, my hope is that these readings are an excellent teaching tool for how to interpret a birth chart. Thank you so much for joining me for another week of Ghost of a Podcast. I hope you take really good care of yourself and others, and I will talk to you in just a couple of days. Bye. Every year they say the end